Tonight, I'm glad to welcome back Charlie Meadows. Charlie came here in the spring of last year and had quite a good attendance, and I believe this is larger attendance than we had last time, and we're glad to have Charlie here. Charlie was a Republican nominee for the state Senate District 50 in 1990. He's been an active radio talk show host, and he's written a column in the Daily Constitution newspaper for 17 years. He's also on the editorial board of the Edmond Sun newspaper and is a member of the John Birch Society, Oklahomans for Sovereignty and Free Enterprise, and he's also the chairman of the Oklahoma Conservative Political Action Committee. Please welcome Charlie Meadows.
Okay, a little over a week ago, Hillary Clinton was criticized for her failure to answer hard questions on virtually any issue. And this is out of the Daily Oklahoman on the 16th of this month. It's called Clinton Dodges Social Security Realities. And one of the things, I'm going to move this up just a little bit. One of the things in here asked about Social Security, even though her husband, when president, said we've got to do something about it, her answer was, I don't really think there's a problem there. Well, tonight, I'm going to try to convince you that there is a problem. And then I'm going to suggest a solution to the problem. I want to see a show of hands. How many of you in this room have ever heard this statement before? When I get old enough to draw Social Security, it won't be there for me. How many of you have heard that? Okay. Next question. How many of you really believe it? Okay. How many of you believe something else will be there to take care of you? Okay. All right. Of those of you that really believe it, you ought to be madder than a wet hornet about it. You know why? Because you are being forced to pay into a system that when you get to the age to begin to draw the benefits, either those benefits won't be there for you or they're going to be greatly reduced, and all your life you will have been paid into something, forced to pay into something that you're not going to reap the benefits out of. I'm not really here to create a generational warfare, even though that may happen at some point in time. But I do want to show you the problem, and I'll try not to get too bogged down in statistics, and I hope you can see this. This little bar graph over here, starting with 2008, and I jumped from 12 to 15 just for room's sake. What I'm trying to show you is next year, the amount of revenues coming in to the Social Security system will exceed the amount paid out. The white represents the amount paid out. The darker blue up there represents the excess. Okay? Now, for the next 2 years, 08 and 09, it's going to be about steady. And then all of a sudden, it's going to be reducing until we get to the year 2015, maybe 16, give or take a year. And all of a sudden, the amount coming in is going to be about the same as the amount going out. The reason it starts changing dramatically, I was born in 1946. I'm 61. Next year, if I choose, at my birthday, I can start withdrawing early. Okay? I am what's called the leading edge of the baby boomers. Today, the baby boomers pay 40% of all taxes and all Social Security. And we're on the verge of retiring. And I'm going to tell you, it's like a big train coming down the track, what it's going to do to this system when it happens. So in about 2015, it's break even. And the demands on it are going to keep increasing. The baby boomer generation's about 13, 14 years along. Okay? Now, what happens to this excess? It goes into, I'm going to call it the trust fund. In one sense, I'm going to call it a lockbox. It goes into the Social Security Trust Fund. Okay? Now, I want to ask you something. When we talk about a trust fund, whether it's a lockbox or not, let's vision this as a big warehouse, or say this room, or say a building the size of this building. Do you want this excess money to go in there and be stacked up in the corner and not invested and not earn any revenues? Or would you rather that money be invested and earn revenues so the fund could get bigger and be more to pay out? Which would you prefer? The latter, as most people would. So the next question I ask, do you want those monies going in here, do you want them invested in something risky, which you might lose the principal and not even be there for you, or do you want it invested in something really safe and secure?
Really safe.
Okay, thank you. And that's what all older people tell me, okay? Next question. What is considered the safest, most secure investment available? Anybody have an idea? Government-backed securities. Okay? Now, how many of you ever heard of the term buying bonds, government bonds, or buying treasury bills? Now, notice the cleverness of the word buying. When you buy a bond or a treasury bill, you know what you're actually doing? You're loaning the federal government money. And they're going to pay you back. Well, what's actually happened, this money goes into this trust fund, and Congress borrows it all out. They replace it. They take the money and they put an IOU there. Okay? And they've been doing this for a long, long time. And they'll do it on maybe 10-year bonds or 20-year bonds or whatever it is. And when those bonds come due, you know what they do? They pay them off with newly borrowed money. Now, I want you to see something and understand something. This year's budget is going to be about $3 trillion. And I'll give you a little idea of how you can determine the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion. If I've got fresh, brand new $100 bills, and I compress them together as tightly as I can, $1 million is a stack about 4.5 inches high. $1 billion is a stack 173 feet high. And $1 trillion is a stack 63 miles high. So does that give you a little concept of million, billion, and trillion here? Okay. The budget this year is going to be $3 trillion. Now, I've just picked the last 3 years. This is the deficit spending for the last 3 years. 2005, it's $553 billion. Deficit spending for a year means we spent more money, $553 billion more this year than we took in tax revenues. In 2006, it was $574. And no matter what politician tell you, the president or whatever, I don't care, when they tell you we're dropping this, it's reducing, the news is good, don't listen to those lies. This year, which just ended on the 30th of September, it was $543 billion. It's virtually steady here. Okay? So what each year's deficit adds up to the total national debt. Remember, deficit is for 1 year, debt is for the total. Now try to follow me. It took this nation 206 years, from 1776 to 1982, to reach the first $1 trillion national debt. We financed World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, rebuilt Germany, and rebuilt Japan. And it took 206 years, 1982, to reach the first $1 trillion. This year, we passed $9 trillion. What is that? 25 years later, the first Gulf War we paid almost nothing for. Saudi Arabia and Japan paid for that. The Gulf War we're in right now, up to this point, total for the 4 years, we've spent about $400 billion. It exacerbates the problem, but it's not all the problem. There's a lot of other things that's problem. As a matter of fact, this figures out to every day of the year, 365 days a year, we are spending $1.49 billion a day more than the federal government takes in. So where do they get that money? They borrow it from the trust fund. Now that's not all of it. They borrow it from us. And they borrow it from communist China. And they borrow it from all over the world. Now, watch this last thing here. Our debt, which is now $9.6 trillion, is made up of two components. If you understand this, you'll never be suckered by a lying politician again. Okay? There's two parts of it. It's the private part and the public part. The private part is what Congress can borrow. You and I can't participate in the private part. So when Congress borrows from the trust fund, or if they borrow from other government retirement funds or whatever, that's this part right here. But the rest of it comes from the public when we buy treasury bills and such. Now, when they tell you, a few years ago, J.C. Watts wins Congress, he was actually honest. He said, we've even paid down the public part of the debt. They did. They borrowed more from the private to pay off the public. That's called robbing Peter to pay Paul. One of the great lies was 3 or 4 years before President Clinton's term was up, which was way too long, is that we had balanced the budget. In the last 2 years, we had surpluses. And George Bush continued with that lie that we had surpluses. You can go log on, Bureau of the Debt, U.S. government, and they now will forward you to a new website, because they just did this the other night, and I don't remember the new one. And you can actually get a history of the entire history of the U.S. debt all the way for over 200 years. And I printed it all out some time ago. Now, my point is this. The last year that Bill Clinton was president, the deficit that year was only 19 and got down to 19 billion. Notice 19 billion is not a balance and it's not a surplus. The first half year of George Bush's presidency and the second half year of Bill Clinton's, it jumped up to like $140 billion. There never was a surplus. It was a lie. And if you ever read Tom Coburn's book, and I don't remember the name of it, he talks about them lying on this. So I urge you to really alert yourself on this. Do you understand? Now here's what happens. When we get to 2015, just 7, 8 years from now, what are they going to borrow from? And in 2016, they have to start paying these IOUs back. What are they going to pay them back with? And each year, the IOUs more of them are going to come due. What are they going to pay them back with? There's no more Social Security to borrow from because it's in trouble. And by about 2030, all of a sudden, if they somehow figure out a way to pay all the IOUs back, they're all paid back, and then what are they going to do? It's estimated that the revenues will drop down to about 72%, the payouts will drop down to about 72%. Now, try to follow me here. When you have a financial problem, whether you're a business, an individual, or a government, this is Commandment 11, 12, and 13. Okay? There's only 3 solutions to a financial problem. I'm trying to make it real simple. Okay? You can spend the same amount and bring more revenue in, or you can spend less and keep the revenue the same, or you can do a little of both, a combination of both. There are no other solutions to financial problems. Okay? So, what I am proposing that we think about here, and I'm going to erase this, is how to solve this. When President Bush came out both election cycles with a desire to reform Social Security, what did he basically say he wanted to do? He wanted to privatize, or in other words, he wanted young people to be able to set aside a portion of what you pay into a private account. Now, from the late 70s until 1983, there was what was called the Galveston Plan. Any of you ever heard of the Galveston Plan? Okay, I brought a few audio tapes back here, really old technology audio tape as opposed to a CD. But I brought a few of them tonight, and it's got several speakers on this about Social Security, and particularly the Galveston Plan. In the late 70s, county governments, city governments could opt out of Social Security and develop their own plan. And so you're going to actually hear, if you listen to that, and I only have about 8 or 10 copies, if you listen to it, you'll hear one of the person that really designed this plan. And so they opted out and they invested in private type investments. And in every arena of benefits, their plan exceeded Social Security. And a person at the low end today, meaning $17,000 a year or less, drawing Social Security, is going to get about $765 a month. Under the Galveston Plan, $1,285 a month. You think the private system's a little better than the Social Security system? It's a whole lot better. And so all I'm saying is, however, Congress saw the writing on the wall, knowing that everyone that could opt out would opt out, and every time somebody opts out, it puts the system under more pressure, so they outlawed it and they stopped it. And there's no more options to it. So what needs to be done is a reform, a total reform of the Social Security system. President Bush made a terrible mistake. He threw out half a plan. And because he threw half a plan out, and he said, all of the details are on the table. Work out the details. We'll do it bipartisan. That allowed his enemies, his political enemies, to frame the debate. And they scared all the old people, along with ARP, American Association of Retired Persons, one of the biggest commie organizations in America. All you have to be is 55 to join it. I've been getting literature from them since I was 55. And they finally stopped because I'd sent them back these nasty little notes. I wouldn't join your Marxist communist organization. My life depended on it. I'm kind of that way. You just have to forgive me. And they finally quit sending me stuff. But they scared old people to death. And that's such a powerful organization. They're a socialist organization. All they want to do is put more burden on your backs and make you pay more. And the more you have to pay, folks, the more you're going to be taken advantage of. So Bush made a tremendous mistake. He should have come out with a complete plan. Now, I'm going to suggest to you here a way to reform Social Security. It took us I think it's 72 years old. In August, it reached its 72nd birthday, I believe. I'm suggesting a 70-year plan out of it, back to total privatization. Now, think about this. If you're in an airplane, there's a couple of ways you can come down. You can come down just like this, boom, straight down, and that's called a hard landing. Or you can come in like this, and that's called a soft landing. And I would suggest everyone in here, the soft landing approach is by far the best. And so, again, in my opinion, it needs to be a plan that you would spread out over a long period. And I think we ought to ask all Americans to participate in the pain. You see, we have violated economic principles in Social Security for a long time, and not just Social Security, even in our federal spending. We violated these economic principles. And I want to tell you something. You can violate God's natural economic laws for a while, but eventually you're going to find out it's the 600-pound gorilla, and it will right itself. And the longer you wait and the more you violate it, the tougher it's going to be when it says it's time to pay the piper. Okay? So what's happened is we have all this humongous debt, and by the way, 1 out of every $7 you pay in taxes goes to pay the interest on this national debt of $9 trillion. And these are low interest rates. If we ever get into a serious inflation cycle, and the Fed pops those up to try to control it, it's going to explode the annual deficit. And just remember this, inflation is caused by expanding the money supply. No other reason for inflation. And what has happened is they have tried to inflate their way out of, you remember when in 2001, where under the guise of surplus, we decided we'd write checks to everyone in America that was a taxpayer, $300 check for a single person, $600 for a family. How many of you remember that? Okay, just a few of you. This is just 2001. Under the guise there's a surplus. There was no surplus. Think about this. Helicopters flying over communities all over America dropping either $300 or $600 checks. What do people do with that? They go out and spend it like I did. I took a trip back to Massachusetts with my wife and I. Flew over New York City the day before the World Trade Center was hit. Okay? Won't go into that. It's a completely different story. Got embroiled in a national controversy in Amherst. Ends up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, and Tony Snow guest hosting for Rush Limbaugh. I won't go into that. It's another story. Maybe another time. Okay? Point is, when you give people money, they go out and spend it. When you start spending it, if it's paper, it's what you call infusing paper into your economy. So we went out and spent it, and what it did? It drove prices, everything up. And so they've been doing that. They've been infusing capital or paper into our economy for a long time. And that's one reason that everything costs so much more. I worked at this university in 1968 here in this student union on a house crew, setting up chairs for meetings like this, and I made 75 cents an hour. Okay? I imagine the house crew today is making $7.50 an hour. Maybe more. That's called inflation, folks. So anyway, I want to suggest to you what we need to do. We need to ask everybody to share in the pain. If everybody will share, then it won't be as painful for anyone. Here's my suggestion, and back at the back, this is all written down. You can look at it. I'm going to ask people that are 81 and above, this is the pain they have to share in, will you just take half of your cost of living raises? I want you to sacrifice half of your annual COLAs. 81 and above, okay? The next age group is 71 through 80. I'm going to ask people that are 71 through 80 to forfeit 3/4 of your cost of living raises. 3/4, okay? This is a half. This is conceptual, all right? Exact figures may vary. It's really hard to get exact figures to figure something like that. It's just conceptual. Age 60 through 70, no COLAs, no cost of living. However, what you do, you will get all the rest of your live-long days. Okay? Age 52 through 59. I'm going to ask that you will invest 10% of what you would normally pay into Social Security into a private investment. But in turn, you'll take a 10% cut in your benefits. Age 44 through 51, I'm going to ask that you will invest 30%, but take a 40% or 35% cut. Okay? Do you see what I'm doing here? The younger you are, I'm moving toward you getting to put more and more into a private investment. Because, I don't know if you know this or not, you invest $60 a month at an average of 10 to 12% interest, and in 40 years, that $60 a month turns into $1 million. Now you say it's too strong of an interest rate? That's the average return in the stock market over 40 years. It's 10 to 12% a year. That's the average. $60 a month turns into $1 million over 40 years. Okay? I'll skip down here to the last one, or the last two. Age 25 and under, you will invest 80% into a private fund, and you'll only get 20%. Excuse me. Oh, that's age 26 through 34. 25 and under. I just said 25 and under. You put 80% in, you get nothing back. Okay. And so what I'm trying to do is suggest to here that someone your age, for the most part, you'll get to put 80% of what you would have to pay in Social Security. And that becomes your private fund. You own that. Hey, if you die if you're married and you die at, say, 65, that's it. There's no ownership there. But if you were to invest in your own private fund, there would be a huge resource for your family and your spouse. The way it is now, at 65, if you're both 65, if you made more than your wife or your husband, they can have your amount. But what if they're about the same? There's no ownership there. And another thing, if you read the literature back there, there's been 2 U.S. Supreme Court decisions that have said that this has become a pay-as-you-go and that Congress is not obligated to pay you anything. If tomorrow they pass a law and said there'll be no more Social Security, it's gone. There's no ownership there. So I want you to understand this is a serious problem. Any candidate running for office at any public venue, you need to ask them, what are you going to do about what are you going to do about reforming Social Security? Any student you see that's a Democrat, you ought to ask them, how could you possibly vote for a Hillary Clinton who says there's no problem here when there's a huge problem here? Any young person would be nuts to vote for a Democrat because it's the Democrats that are opposed to this. I'm going to tell you something. When they were first forming this in the 30s, they talked about making private funds. But the socialists and the government said, no way, that won't make people dependent upon government. In fact, if we let them do private funds, they won't even need government. In other words, from the beginning, it was intended to make people dependent upon government. Because if I'm the giver of government benefits to you, and particularly you're retired, and you sure don't want to vote for anyone that would risk those government benefits or refuse to give you more. Alexander Fraser Tytler, 1770, in the book, The Rise and Fall of the Athenian Empire, in the chapter called Cycles of Democracy, said this: a democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It will only exist until the people realize they can vote themselves a largesse from the public treasury. From that point on, they will always vote for the politician, promising them the greatest amount of social benefits, and that society will always collapse due to fiscal irresponsibility. We're headed there right now. I don't know how far away we are. This is serious. This is a threat to everyone in this room. Thank you very much for coming.
Let's give it up.
Charlie.